Hey guys, Desolator Magic here, and I thought I'd make a really interesting video, a little bit off the topic of what I usually do, but I was wondering this myself, so I looked into it, and then I thought, why am I researching this and then not making a video about it? In Standard right now, going all the way back to BFZ, which cards might go up when Aether Revolt comes out? Now, with only like 20 or so cards spoiled, it's pretty hard to say, but we do know one of the mechanics, and usually once you've seen that many cards, you can get a feel for the overall strategy. Like, is it going to be spell heavy, creature heavy, one mechanic heavy? Like, when you saw the very first card with Devotion, you thought, oh, okay, I don't think I'll invest in dual color lands, thanks. And it turns out, yeah, there were mixed color decks and there were mono decks that ran Devotion. There was even 2-color Devotion decks, and those were kind of a train wreck. Now, we do already know that one of the mechanics is going to be Improvise, which is basically Super Convoke, but only for artifacts. So actually, I had to go check what the name is. I've quite literally been calling it Artifact Super Convoke. So your artifacts can tap for 1 colorless mana to pay for a spell that has Improvise, and not all of the spells with Improvise are actually not enchantments, artifacts. In fact, so far, the only one I know about is a sorcery. Also, it looks like vehicles might continue to be a thing, although with red-white vehicles being so crazy, it might not be that big of a thing, but they didn't know that when they designed and finalized this set. So they might go a little overboard with vehicles, but the one thing that I'm seeing everywhere is just so many references to artifacts, and it looks like some of the most powerful cards are artifacts, so this is going to be total robot army. We're talking like Terminator movies here. So what makes me think that Improvise will be actually big instead of just a total flop or like a take it or leave it kind of thing that if it happens to go in your deck, great. I hate to do this out of order, but one of the cards that I haven't covered in my League series, as if you haven't seen it elsewhere, is Paradox Engine. Whenever you cast a spell, untap all non-land permanents you control. Boom, directly works perfectly with Improvise, because it would untap all of your artifacts. And paying for really expensive stuff or cheating it onto the battlefield is obviously going to be huge, because it already is. BFZ was all about, Cryptolith, right? Tap your Scions and then sack them, get the 2-for-1 special, and bring out a gigantic Eldrazi. Now it's going to be just servos, Thopters, tap them, bring out giant stuff, and free cast a bunch of artifacts while also bringing them back from the graveyard. That's at least the impression I've got. I might be completely wrong. They don't usually purposely be misleading. They actually want to be representative of what the set's like when they pick the first couple spoilers. So with all that said, I would say that there's about 9 cards I picked out that could potentially just go through the roof, just completely go crazy. And a lot of these are like $1 and down cards, so that's pretty cool. So if you really wanted to invest in them, honestly, I wouldn't. I mean, if you bought all 9 that I'm recommending right now, maybe 1 or 2 might spike up. I mean, this is totally not a sure thing, but it's possible. At the very least, if you're holding playsets of these, don't trade them away, don't sell them. Or if you see somebody wanting to trade away, them, or you want to trade a $5 card and somebody says, oh, here's my trade binder, and you find a playset of a $1 card, there you go, because it might go up. The first card I picked out was Toolcraft Exemplar. No surprise here. This card is just under $1, okay? And by the way, all these prices are eBay because TCG Player uses pretend fantasy prices. This is go out and buy it right now, this second low eBay price, and it's actually the X4 price divided by 4. Obviously, that helps rule out hidden shipping fees. So Toolcraft Exemplar is already crazy popular in second-rate decks that are non-net decks. Everybody's playing this. If you're playing servos or clues, you're playing this. Even if you're playing vehicles, you're playing Toolcraft. Because he's a 1/1 for 1, so that's already, okay, it's baseline, whatever. But then, at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control an artifact, it gets +2/+1. That's 3 damage, a 3/2 for 1. That is like Tarmogoyf broken. And I don't think people have problems bringing out artifacts, equipment, vehicles, and clues. So yes, it is even a more guaranteed thing than the boost that Tarmogoyf gets. And then if you control 3 more artifacts, now you've got a 3/2 first striker. I can see why they limited this to combat only, because this is insane. Unfortunately, it still works for crewing, because literally during the phase called beginning of combat, you could crew it, crew anything for 3, because at that point he would have the bonus. So with artifacts becoming big, If white is the big color, this guy could go through the roof. So this is, I'd give it a 9 out of 10 on the likelihood to go up scale. That is, of course, the standard unit of measurement that I just made up. Now, next up, it's hard to say that this would actually go up, but I have one really good reason, and you guys have been watching my channel for a while. You're going to like this reason. Okay, you're going to hate this reason. I'm going to like this reason. It's Tireless Tracker. Now, he's somewhere around $5 or $6. I mean, just from what I remember. I'm not even going to bother looking it up because I just traded some away for the equivalent of about $5. It's a 3/2 for 3, and whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, investigate, and then whenever you sack a clue, put a 1/1 counter on Tireless Tracker. And if you have 2 out, they're non-legendary, and it does double trigger. So he's just powerful, and he's mid-level, he's high attack, he can boost his toughness over time along with his attack. I can see why he's $5. Also, I think it's probably in a Delirium deck. I mean, for that price level, it would have to be. But besides that, Landfall, even though they didn't label it Landfall, is the most consistent way to bring out clues regularly that I've ever seen. So once again, it's like, yes, would this work as an artifact count generation where you're tapping clues for mana for the improvise mechanic? Yes, obviously it would. It would be amazing. But is green going to be the color? Are people going to play green artifacts, or are they going to play blue artifacts, or red artifacts, or white artifacts, or a mix? Honestly, probably a mix. But here's the thing. There's a whole bunch of Eldrazi that cost 10. There's a whole bunch of artifacts that cost around 10. Or even the Gear Hulks, they're pretty expensive. There's just generally expensive artifacts. Even the vehicles, they ain't cheap. So if you're building an improvised deck, or if you just basically throw in Paradox Engine, like I mentioned earlier, Cryptolith Rite. Cryptolith Rite was one of the most powerful cards printed in all of Standard right now. The problem is, nobody really had anything too spectacular to do with the mana because there was a complete lack of green X spells. You basically had to go green-red, and then it was like a single-purpose gimmick deck. And I built one, it worked, I beat a lot of people with it, but other than that, it was so narrow. On the flip side, the other reason that Cryptolith Rite didn't really take off is because people could get to a consistent 8 to 10 mana availability on an early turn without the card. So why even throw it in? Why not just, generate some Scions instead, or, have a recurring Scion trigger, or an Eldrazi fetch card, or something more useful to the deck, because you're not going to have a problem getting to 8 or 10, and that is true. Obviously, I put it in my Rolling Thunder deck where I could deal like 3 damage to one creature, 5 to another, 2 to another, and then like 10 to the player and still have mana left over. Come to think of it, I actually put it in 2 really successful decks. So Cryptolith Rite could go through the roof, that's kind of one of the cards as well, but Tireless Tracker, that's the card that would go with it if there's Improvise in green, and if green is a really artifact-friendly color. But considering it has the best natural ramp, if you're going to ramp up to really powerful big stuff, artifacts mixed with Eldrazi, I think Tireless Tracker is going to be found in even more decks. So the likelihood that this card will go up, or at the very least maintain its price, I'd also give it about a 9 out of 10. Now next up, we've got a heck of a wild card. This is a callback to one of the most powerful cards in the Allies decks, but for some reason it never really went above, like $1, I think, maybe $2. I just don't remember this card ever being worth anything. It's Stoneforge Masterwork. This one's pretty simple. Equipped creature gets a +1/+1 for each other creature you control that shares a type with it, equipped 2, and it only costs 1 to throw out. That's a turn 1 drop right there. People loved this card. So obviously, if you're playing 100% Rally, 100% Allies, all of your creatures share a type, you're definitely going to want Stoneforge Masterwork. So why this never became a $5 to $10 card, I couldn't tell you. Even right now, you can get them for between 50 cents and $1, so that's actually honestly a little bit higher than I thought. But it goes into anything. I mean, this could go in a werewolf deck, a vampire deck, an allies deck, an elemental deck. It could go into any tribal deck ever, and there's a lot out there. It's just none of them are considered tier 1 net decks. So this in itself is an artifact. It's also an equipment, which a lot of artificers reference equipment. If you're running a mostly creature deck where the artifacts are creatures, the creatures are artifacts, this would be a fantastic include right here. It would be almost automatic if it's still on people's radar. This would take one mid-grade, kind of okay artifact creature, and with a couple servos, shazam, you've got a gigantic creature, and you can just pass this thing around. I mean, equip 2, you could swing with a creature, giant 10/10, whatever happens to him, who cares, and then move the armor to a blocker for 2 at the end of your turn, or I should say second main phase. So Stoneforge Masterwork, I'd give that maybe an 8 out of 10 in the chances of going up, because tribals aren't usually the absolute top deck, so I had to take a point off, but other than that, this is insanely powerful and everything points to artifacts. Next up, Saheeli's Artistry. Okay, it costs 6. I get it. It's a sorcery. And the funny thing is, this mechanic, which is like more powerful than the charms from Tarkir, it never really caught on. I mean, it wasn't on any cards that anybody played that I've ever seen. In fact, it wasn't even on that many cards. Choose one or both. You get both modes. You don't have to choose 2 out of 4 or 1 out of 2. You get both if you want. 1, create a token that's a copy of target artifact. So obviously in an artifact deck, you would want that. Or create a token that's a copy of target creature, except that it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Pretty much speaks for itself. If there's some kind of mana ramp blue deck, which is a bit of a long shot, this would be insane. Just imagine cloning Panharmonicon, or cloning like a different creature that you don't even own, that one of your opponents owns, and then make it also an artifact, and then throw in some, artifact-based bonuses. I mean, it just absolutely speaks for itself. The only problem is it costs 6. So I'd give this about, a 3 out of 10 on the potential to go up. Considering these are right around 25 cents a copy, yeah, you shouldn't have a problem picking these up. I mean, if you were to spend $5 now, you could make like 50 in the future potentially. That's just really a long shot. Now the next one, no surprise here, Panharmonicon. Yes, it costs 4, that's what's keeping it out of the absolute top decks, but it's in some crazy powerful decks right now. I mean, it's basically the giant ETB cloner. The only problem is it doesn't clone landfall. But with more cards being added, none being lost, Panharmonicon can only get better. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Note that it says artifact or a creature. Once again, that one kind of speaks for itself, and it went from $11 all the way back down to about $1.50 to $2 right now. So I would maybe pick some up even just to build a deck and use it yourself, not even an investment. It itself is an artifact. It's already usable for improvise. I mean, you never know. I would give that one about a 6 out of 10 on the likelihood of going up. Next up, we've got Metalwork Colossus. Now, this card is actually a little bit expensive right now. Well, if you consider $1 a piece to be expensive, I kind of do. Anything above like 50 cents on the open market, I'm like, okay, that's a playable, good-ish rare. Well, I've seen this a lot. I honestly thought it was in a top-tier net deck. I don't know, maybe it's not. At this price, I would suspect it's not. But the problem with him is he costs X less to cast, where X is the total converted mana cost of non-creature artifacts you control. The non-creature part is what kills it. So Thopters and Servos completely pointless because they are creatures and they have a mana cost of 0, or no converted mana cost. I forgot what the actual rule is on that. But if you wanted to mix a hybrid deck, sacrifice 2 artifacts, those could be Servos, return Metalwork Colossus from your graveyard to your hand. So they finally kill it, and you could cast it for 0 again. I mean, that is sheer power. That is absolutely insane. The one problem is I feel like artifact creatures are going to be the really, really big point in the next set. But even if it's vehicles, those aren't technically creatures, so as long as you don't somehow cast them in the middle of combat when they are creatures, you don't have a problem there. You have to pay 11 between all the cards you have on the field to get them out for free, but sometimes if you get them down to just 5, it's doable, and there's a lot of turns. Also, you could free cast them a whole bunch of different ways. So I'd give him about a 5 out of 10 on the potential to go up in price scale. Next up, we've got an insanely powerful card. I think it's floating in around 25 cents or something close to it. Marionette Master. So once again, it costs 6 and it's only a 1/3 creature. That's pathetic, but it does have Fabricate 3, and in this case, you would basically 100% of the time put all 3 counters on Marionette Master. Not that you can split it, it's basically one or the other. I'm saying you would not create the servos. Now, its effect is whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power, which would potentially be 4. So every time they kill any artifact, or if you sacrifice an artifact, or if you yourself destroy an artifact, basically if any artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, not from your hand, for any reason, they take 4 damage. That is just instant death. I mean, that makes Ob Nixilis's emblem look like crap. At the very least, it's on par with it. Once again, the problem is it costs 6, so we're talking black mana ramp, not the most common thing in the world. But this coming out super late when there's a board state full of artifacts, totally not a big problem, but it is a useless card in your opening hand. So I'd give this one about a 2, maybe a 3 out of 10 on the potential go up scale, but it's just so good. It's so powerful, it's so game ending, you can't overlook it. Next up, Inventor's Goggles. This costs 1 to cast, and it gives an equipped creature +1/+2, so not amazing, just a good basic equipment. But whenever an Artificer enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach Inventor's Goggles to it, for free, and instantly. Otherwise, it has an equip cost of 2. So if Artificers really take off as a class, which that's a stretch, this might be an include just to get your kind of wimpy little, like, technique heavy, I guess you could say, like triggered ability heavy Artificers instead of high combat Artificers, because there is no such thing. It could give them the boost that they need to either be survivable, against, like, I'll say lightning bolt, even though it's not legal, you know what I mean. Direct damage and stat dropping. Otherwise, you could just make it good enough in combat. You could now swing with a mid-size Artificer. So the free equip is fantastic. You throw this out on turn 1 and just sit there and wait, and if you ever get stalled out, don't pull the cards you need. Boom, pay the 2, equip it to something, and play hot potato if the creature dies. I do love me some equipment, and this is one of the absolute best in Standard right now, which really describes the pathetic state of equipment in Standard right now. Not really like a compliment to Inventor's Goggles at all. Now, I'd give this a 0 out of 10 on the potential to go upscale solely based on the fact that it's a common, and there's no such thing as an expensive common. Well, in Standard. Still, I just wanted people to be aware of it. And the next card is Animation Module. This is a 1-cost artifact, so it should already be on people's radar. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are placed on a permanent you control, you may pay 1 colorless, generic. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token, or as I like to call it, improvised mechanic fuel. So you have to pay 1, that's annoying, and you have to be putting counters on something, which is also annoying, but there are quite a bit of ways to do it. Black-white counters with artifacts is actually a pretty decent deck right now. Now here's the interesting part. If you pay 3 and tap it, choose a counter on target permanent or player, give that permanent or player another counter of that kind. So that's any type of counter at all. Hell, you could do poison counters. You couldn't because it's not in Standard, but in Modern you could. So if you manage to get 1 creature with Fabricate and choose the counters option, you can keep dumping counters on it for 3, and then triggering itself, paying an extra 1, and coming out with another servo. I could see that being a valuable loop, especially with this costing 1 to get out instead of like 3 or 4. So I'd give this, about a 6 on the potential to go upscale. Considering it's 50 cents a copy, that might be worth grabbing. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'd say, what about the other 2 modules? There are 3 powerful modules, and they all kind of work together, right? This is the only one that's a rare. The other 2 are uncommon, which, if you think about it, is pretty much the weirdest thing ever. They're practically clones of each other. They're clearly supposed to go together. Why aren't they the same rarity? So that might be really telling. There might be like a little hidden secret there. Also, Decoction Module sucks, and Fabrication Module, it's just not quite good enough either. Now, Fabrication Module with Animation Module, that's insane. I've seen people play that deck. It is crazy. So keep that in mind. Those are the 2 that really fit together. But obviously, being an uncommon, it just can't go up in price. Not significantly. So those are all my picks for now. If there's any I missed, which, yeah, I did. I guarantee it. I literally just searched for every Standard card that had the word artifact and then the rarity of rare or mythic and look through them from there. Oh, it's funny? None of the mythics are good enough, not even the angel. So if you want, go pick some of these up, or at least don't trade them away, or just set them aside, whatever you want to do with this information. I'm sure it's, 80 to 90% not going to happen, but they're at least the ones that are on my radar right now as it sits. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the information, and I will see you next video.